বৰঠাকুৰ IAS একাডেমি প্ৰস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা বৰঠাকুৰ IAS একাডেমি।
Hello everyone, welcome to Hindu Analysis for 12th August 2021. Let us begin with the first article today. Kaziranga guards get satellite phones. In a first for India and in a boost to environmental conservation and animal protection in national parks in India, the Kaziranga Park, the national park in Assam, and the forest guards who are protecting that particular bit of national treasure will be equipped with satellite phones. This is from the government of Assam stating that they took a decision to provide satellite phones for boosting anti-poaching measures. In national parks all around India, one of the biggest problems is poaching activities carried out by poachers. The issue with that is the forest staff in India are under-equipped and under-trained in order to carry out anti-poaching operations. Despite that, they do kind of put up a good fight against poachers, but not in terms of having enough impact on completely eradicating poaching activities in our national parks. One of the prime targets in Kaziranga Park are the one-horned rhinos, and in a bid to boost their capabilities and enhance their effectiveness in anti-poaching activities. So in that direction, the government handed over 10 phones to Kaziranga forest personnel, and these phones will be used by forest rangers in park ranges where there are no wireless or mobile connectivity. Right, this is the first time that the government has provided satellite phones to forest personnel. And this is also the first time law enforcement agencies are being given satellite phones in that regard too. The satellite phones will certainly provide an additional way of communication to these forest personnel who are carrying out these anti-poaching campaigns. In terms of advancements, these 10 phones would certainly provide certain edge over the poachers, right? Because during emergencies like floods, which are an yearly occurrence in Kaziranga National Park, certainly this filling this communication gap is a big shot in the arm for conservation efforts in our country, particularly in Kaziranga National Park. Now we know that public is not allowed to use or purchase satellite phones in India, but the state government of Assam did it through the Assam State Disaster Management Authority, and they procured 10 satellite phones for Kaziranga. And again, this is certainly a welcome sign in our conservation efforts. So it has to be said that in recent times, the Assam government has been at the forefront of environmental conservation in India, where they added 2 national parks to their parks list, where they have been increasing the funding allocated to environmental conservation and environmental conservation programs. As we know, Indian forest guards are not armed as our police counterpart, and recently the governments, various state governments made the decision to ensure that these forest rangers are trained in arms and tactics, and also they decided to arm them with semi-automatic weapons. Again, the challenge of poaching in India is severe and is at a critical juncture, because the rate at which poaching activities are being carried out by poachers, taking undue advantage of these personal gaps and communication gaps, is huge, and trying to plug these holes in our system is certainly a welcome sign. So moving on to the next article, an urban jobs safety net. Recently, the International Monetary Fund released the World Economic Outlook report of April 2021, and this report made some startling observations in regards to countries' GDPs, countries' unemployment rates, countries' rural and urban divide. So let us look at what this Economic Outlook report of April 2021 had in terms of GDPs and unemployment rates. This report kind of pointed out the fact that India's GDP plummeted by 8% whereas China, on the contrary, posted a growth of 2.3%. That is absolutely true. During the pandemic and post-pandemic, particularly during the pandemic, the only country to post positive growth rate was China. Apart from China, every other country, including the US, UK, Russia, all major powers, economic powers, have posted negative growth rates, and their GDP numbers plummeted to lower numbers than they have ever before. And on the contrary, China has was the only country to post a growth rate beyond 1% or 2.3% to be specific. The report also made it public that 95 million people have fallen into ranks of extreme poor category. This included already vulnerable sections of our population, but also population section that was termed as middle income groups, but due to loss of their ability to earn livelihood to make their expenses meet, whoever were considered to be in this middle economic group or above poor category, because of lack of availability of jobs and so on and so forth, these vulnerable group also fell into extreme poor category. So it had a knock-on effect on not only the poor sections of our society, but also other sections of the society that we thought earlier were insulated from certain shocks in our economy, but that proved to be contrary, right? Let us look at our Indian economic report also. The Center for Monitoring Indian Economy estimates that the unemployment rate in India peaked to 23.5% in April 2020 before falling to 6.9% in February of 2021. But remember, these numbers, though not important, but the range that you are seeing from 23.5 to 6.9 is a huge range, and we have to be very careful when you are discussing these numbers. So traditionally, the government approach has been to address these issues from a sectoral viewpoint, right? You have unemployment rate, you have low growth rate, you have lower recovery rates. Then the government would formulate policy that is specific to each sector. But the pandemic has shown that these kinds of sectoral approaches do not work in these kinds of situations, because not an individual sector was spared from facing devastation or facing a negative growth or negative trend because of this pandemic. So what is the need of the hour is to have an approach that is rural and urban based perspectives, right? You need not only have a sectoral viewpoint. What this pandemic is calling for is an rural urban perspective, meaning you look at the growth, or you look at schemes, or you look at problems from a rural urban perspective. The reasons that the author of this editorial gives is that, first, when there is an economic shock, it is essential to provide people with formal access to a livelihood safety net. That is absolutely true. What was the thing that we saw during lockdowns? Because of the lockdowns, uh, people could not gain employment. As a result of this, they were unable to make any livelihood, right? These people didn't have job opportunities because of lockdowns. As a result of this, they lost their ability to earn a living, and hence they were forced to leave their current place of living to their rural homes. That was the migration that we saw. That was the migrant migration. That was the migrant crisis that we saw during the peaks of COVID-19, particularly in India. The second reason to look at things from a rural urban point of view is that the livelihood safety net must have comprehensive coverage. You don't just take small parts of a group or a socio-economic group and try to cover them. Instead, whatever the safety net that you're talking about must have a comprehensive coverage. It should cover every spectrum or every paradigm in the problem that you are having right now. One of the best examples of having a comprehensive coverage system in India, or a comprehensive safety net, a livelihood safety net, is the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. But the problem with this scheme is, though it has been a success, this exists only in rural areas. The Manregas does not cover urban areas, right? what India doesn't have right now is a livelihood safety net that not only covers rural areas but also urban areas. On the contrary, you may get a question that doesn't the government of India have an mission like Manrega in urban areas? Yes, Indian government does operate the National Urban Livelihood Mission, but the difference is while the Manrega is focused on wage creation and job creation, the National Urban Livelihood Mission is focused on self employment through skill upgradation and credit linkages through banks. That is the significant difference. The scheme does not guarantee wage employment, where in Manrega, a person who is enrolled under Manrega gets guaranteed wage employment. That doesn't happen in National Urban Livelihood Mission. It talks about self-employment, that too by skill upgradation, where they will be financially supported through credit linkages from banks. So that is the major difference between the National Rural Employment Manrega and Urban Employment or Urban Livelihood Mission. Now, as we discussed earlier, migrant labor were moving in large numbers from urban areas to rural areas because due to lockdowns, due to the restrictions imposed on economic activities, generally people who were employed in urban areas in industries were left with no other option but to move back to their ancestral homes. So, this is actually a symptomatic of the rural urban livelihood security divide, and this kind of was brought forth by the pandemic. Though experts were reluctant to accept this reality, everybody was saying that in India the migration phenomenon happens from rural to urban areas. See, one of the biggest things that Manrega was brought in was to check these kinds of migration, the migration that happens from rural to urban areas in search of better livelihood, in search of employment, right? That was the reason that Manrega was brought in, or at least one of the reasons that Manrega was brought in. But the pandemic has shown that in India, migration happens not only from rural to urban areas. If the same thing happens in urban areas, it might also get a reverse phenomenon where we are seeing people migrating in large numbers from urban to rural areas in search of employment. So, the pandemic has simply shown that you need a comprehensive livelihood safety net. The idea that if you cover rural areas, you don't need a safety net, or having a rural safety net is enough, is simply enough to cover or comprehensively provide a livelihood safety net in India is a myth. What we need right now is a rural livelihood safety net, which Manrega already does, and we need a similar program in urban areas also. One of the states that has been able to experiment with these kinds of urban livelihood safety net concept is the state of Himachal Pradesh, right? The state of Himachal Pradesh last year launched a scheme called Mukhyamantri Shahri Ajivika Guarantee Yojana, where the objective was that they were trying to enhance the livelihood security in urban areas, particularly by providing 120 days of guaranteed minimum wage employment, right? The employment provided to these people for a period of 120 days was guaranteed under the scheme, and it was a livelihood security scheme that was particularly targeting urban population. So what essentially the Himachal Pradesh government's Mukhyamantri Shahri Ajivaka Guarantee Yojana. Shahri means city, right? That's the name of it. In program itself self-identifies as an urban oriented scheme. So what they essentially would do is the person who enrolls into the scheme will be guaranteed a minimum wage, and they would be provided 120 days of guaranteed wage employment, that too minimum wage. In the first year of its operation, a 250,000 man days, right, which was about benefiting about 3% of the urban households in Himachal Pradesh, were benefited. So one of the biggest takeaways from the Himachal Pradesh's Guarantee Yojana or Ajivaka Guarantee Yojana is that in its year of operation, it benefited about 3% of the total urban households in Himachal Pradesh. So what are the other biggest takeaways from this scheme? The other biggest takeaway from this scheme is that, so when you look at the numbers from the Himachal Pradesh's employment scheme, there is enough physical space for state governments and central governments to launch similar initiatives. The second thing that we have to also look at is separate minimum wages for rural and urban areas do not cause migration to urban areas, because whatever the money that they are earning through these separate schemes, the cost of living in urban area will have an offsetting effect, because there would be an essentially difference in how much people in urban areas earn through these minimum wages initiatives compared to rural areas. There will be certain discrepancies in the meaning that the people in urban areas, or the scheme that is being implemented in urban area, will compensate more compared to the scheme that is being implemented in rural areas. So one of the fears that one would assume is that because people in urban areas are getting more money for the same scheme, people tend to migrate in anticipating higher payout. But the reality is, one must realize the fact that the cost of living in urban areas is high, far high in some cities compared to rural areas. So that aspect of the cost of living in urban areas will have an offsetting effect, which prevents or which might force people to think before migrating from rural to urban areas to enjoy the benefits of the same scheme, but with a different level of compensation. Now, the author simply points out to the fact that such livelihood safety net schemes are like economic vaccines, meaning they not only protect people against unemployment, they will also ensure that economy does not collapse. So this idea that is a good idea that needs to be explored in a larger context. So moving on to the next article, Lok Sabha adjourned 2 days ahead of schedule, sees 22% productivity. So recently the Parliament monsoon session ended on a stormy note, where it ended 2 days ahead of schedule. Speaker Om Birla expressed displeasure over the fact of repeated disruptions that happened during the sessions, right? He pointed out to the fact that only 21 hours of functioning took place in Parliament, and only 22% of productivity of the House was seen in the monsoon session, particularly Lok Sabha. One of the biggest victims of these kinds of disruptions in Lok Sabha was the 0 hour, where individuals are allocated time so that they can raise issues that are important. And the second aspect of the parliamentary function or the Lok Sabha functioning that was affected was the question hour. Because of these disruptions, most of the days both 0 hour and question hour were disturbed. So according to PRS legislative research data, this monsoon session was the fourth least productive Lok Sabha session after last 2 decades, where we saw a productivity of just 21%, and even Rajya Sabha was not spared of this activity, because it logged a productivity of only 28%, its 8th least productive session since 1999. As far as the House proceedings goes, the House managed to successfully pass 20 bills, but sadly mostly without any debate or participation from the opposition. So that is not a good sign when you are talking about a democratic parliament, where parliament is supposed to be the highest authority in our country, and parliament is where the bills and laws are discussed in an extensive manner. But this session, though the number of bills is high, mostly passed without debate or participation from the opposition, right? The only exception seems to be the one regarding to the OBC bill, where the amendment of 127th amendment bill, which restores a power of the states to make their OBC's list, was passed after an extensive debate from all parties. This passed unanimously without any single opposition from the opposition parties. Also, this we discussed yesterday in detail regarding the provisions, what was the need for it, and why this amendment is being made. Now, the speaker pointed out to the fact that the House had 17 sittings and was supposed to work 96 hours, right? It had an allotted period of 96 hours for business, but because of these disruptions, only 21 hours and 14 minutes could be utilized. Hence, the total productivity of Lok Sabha this monsoon session was 22%, meaning this is the fourth least productive session of Lok Sabha in the last 2 decades. Now, as I said, even though monsoon session was badly hit in terms of productivity, where we saw only 22% of productivity taking place, the time spent on discussion and passage of bills came down dramatically and drastically. The government did manage to push through a large volume of legislation. Remember, 20 bills were passed, 13 were introduced in this session, 7 were from earlier sessions. In all, 20 bills were passed through this session. Remember, the productivity is 22, but the number of bills that were passed during this session was high. Now, the PRS data points out to the fact that in Lok Sabha, only 34 minutes on average it took only 34 minutes on average to pass a bill, while in Rajya Sabha it did in 46 minutes. The only bill that had any reasonable amount of debate was that OBC bill, which was discussed for more than an hour in both houses. But remember, any kind of disruption in parliament will reflect directly in legislation and governance, right? It's a constitutional guarantee that bills should be discussed, dissected, or whatever it is in the houses of parliament. These are where laws are made, but seeing these number of bills being passed without much debate or participation from the opposition itself is kind of detrimental to the climate of politics that we currently live in. So moving on to the next article, Biden to host a democracy summit in December. So this is the second summit that US President Biden is hosting in the last since his election to US presidency last year. Now, this will be a summit for democracy. Now, the first one was virtual, but the second one will be an in-person. So this democracy summit will hinge around 3 themes. 1. Defending against authoritarianism, fighting corruption, and promoting respect for human rights. So during his election campaign, Biden promised that he is going to carry out democracy summits in US and around the world to enhance cooperation between democracies and to enhance democratic principles in the world. And he would reinvigorate US's position in the world to lead other countries towards the path of democracy. That was the rhetoric thing that he was saying during election campaigns. But as a promise of his election campaign, he is trying to actually make this thing into an international summit. Now, the summit is seen by experts as a way to counter the growing Chinese influence in the world, particularly the South Asian region, where we are seeing a lot of Chinese activity taking place, and many countries willing to work with China irrespective of their difference in democratic principles, right? So in the first summit, what happened was each country came up with their own commitments or their own list of commitments that they made in the first summit. Now the idea is that following a year of consultation, coordination, and action, President Biden will again invite those world leaders to gather once more to showcase the progress these individual countries made against their own commitments that they promised in the first summit. So the idea is that this would bring like-minded countries into a single forum where they can meet and exchange ideas. But we have to wait and see how this translates into real-world action. Thank you. Stay safe. Namaste.
বৰঠাকুৰ IS একাডেমি প্ৰস্তুতি আৰু অধ্যয়নৰ নিৰ্ভৰযোগ্য ঠিকনা
বৰঠাকুৰ IAS একাডেমি